Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Oklahoma kicking off, Dill. I'm just going to call it the Jackson Arnold era. I get we saw a start from him against Arizona, but this is the true Jackson Arnold era. He's been the quarterback one all off season long. And Dill, opening up against Temple, this game should be a blowout. But I think there's a lot of fun storylines for this Oklahoma program. You know, a lot of these storylines that we've been talking about for Oklahoma really all off season long. I want to dive into a few things that we want to see from this Oklahoma program week one against Temple, getting into SEC play, fired up to get into it. Now, before we do, to the Oklahoma fans, would love to hear some of the biggest storylines, some of the things that you guys are looking for most during this football game. And of course, if you all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. The Oklahoma fans rocking with the boys in the middle of the summer. All the support you guys have shown, it means the absolute world. We appreciate you guys. And Dill, without further ado, I want to start on maybe a talking point that's not going to get as much national media attention. That is the offensive line. I feel like everybody's going to be talking about Jackson Arnold heading into this football game. We're going to talk about Jackson Arnold too, but I think the biggest storyline for Oklahoma is on the offensive line, but most importantly, the physicality of this Oklahoma group. Yes, you have some new faces coming in, but Dill, you look at Jake Taylor and Jacob Sexton. This is it's a nasty offensive line. It's the kind of offensive line I think Brent Venables wants. Can they impose their will on a defensive front, which they should certainly impose their will on? It's probably the number one thing I'm looking for in this football game.
Especially because last year, I think that's almost like a misnomer. It's like Oklahoma had a lot of guys who I think were perceived as really, really good players, and they were a solid unit, solid in pass protection, but they were never that like ultra physical unit. I think a lot of Oklahoma fans wish they sort of were. And you kind of look this year. I mean, you kind of said it. I mean, Jacob Sexton, when he was in, that's where he really shined. He was moving guys off the ball. Jake Taylor, really, really strong player. I'm really excited to see what he is in game reps and what he can do. And then you even look on the inside. I mean, you look at a guy like Nuewu. Feels like more that guy. I almost wish some of those other guys were from last year, where he does want to move guys off the wall. Eugene Brooks, like a lot of guys who I'm really excited to see what the physicality they can bring, and can they avoid some of those negative plays and like those 1 yard gains. I thought last year they hit some big ones, but they weren't a team that was just sitting the floor at like 3 yards because their offensive line.
I think you said it best. Like, again, this Oklahoma offensive line last year was solid, but like we said all year with Jay Taylor in the offseason, you talk about a guy that you want to go into a bar fight with. Like, Jay Taylor might be number one on the list in the country. He's a nasty dude. And so this Oklahoma offensive line, although there are question marks about what the rotation is going to look like, I think it's going to be a nasty group, and I kind of want to see that nastiness against this Temple defensive line that, again, Oklahoma should be having their way. Now, the second storyline, obviously, we want to give Jackson Arnold a steady run game, keep this Oklahoma offense on schedule. What do we want to see from Jackson Arnold? I think it's two things. One, I think one thing, really, but it's two different parts. One, can you uncork Jackson Arnold? I think one of the things that we are most excited about is that Jackson Arnold brings some juice to this Oklahoma offense that Dillon Gabriel just didn't really bring, right? Dillon Gabriel is a phenomenal college football quarterback that there's a reason that he's playing a 6th year in college football. He doesn't necessarily have that NFL arm talent. Jackson Arnold does. There are throws that you can ask Jackson Arnold to make that you just couldn't ask Dillon Gabriel to make. And I think secondly, kind of how does he blend? Yes, I'm going to use my NFL arm talent, but I'm also going to walk the line, and I'm not going to put the ball in harm's way all too often. That's the one concern you have coming out of fall camp is, yes, there have been some rumors about some turnover issues. I would put that a lot more on the Oklahoma defense that we think is going to be dope as opposed to Jackson Arnold. That being said, how does Jackson Arnold walk that line between being a difference maker, pushing the ball down the field, but at the same time, I'm not going to put the ball in harm's way?
Yeah, and that's such like a classic thing. I think everyone, you hear one thing about a couple turnovers. This guy's turnover prone. It's like we really don't know what he is yet, but we know he's super talented. And I think you're right. You don't want to shy away from that. You don't want to play scared. You don't want to kind of like muzzle him, if you will, and make him not play the way he can play. Because at the end of the day, they've really given him a lot of talent on the boundary. I mean, you look at guys like Deion Burks, who I think is criminally underrated. I think he should have a monster year. He's a guy who can really push the ball down the field. You got guys like Nick Anderson, Jaquez Petaway. You have a lot of guys who, again, can do some exciting things in this offense. And that's why I think you're looking for Jackson Arnold to be the guy who can unlock all that talent and really have arguably a more exciting, more explosive offense than what they had last year.
100%. I think there was a reason. I don't think Brent Venables said, hey, Dillon Gabriel, you need to transfer. But I think there was a reason why Dillon Gabriel transferred and you're going with Jackson Arnold, because he brings a little bit more juice to this Oklahoma offense. And might there be some growing pains for a young quarterback that's learning to walk that line? Yeah, absolutely. That being said, the ceiling for this Oklahoma offense is going to be higher with Jackson Arnold at quarterback. I think the last fascinating conversation is, all right, who are the pass catchers that emerge as the guys for Oklahoma? And I think we first got to start with Deion Burks. Still, I don't think there's a set of boys that are higher on Deion Burks than we are heading into 2024. We both have him as a top 10 wide receiver in the country. And man, do I think he's a perfect wide receiver to have for a young quarterback. You talk about a guy that is so easy to get involved in an offense. Still, I kind of made this comp. I feel good about it. I think he's just a juiced up Drake Stoops. I think he's a Drake Stoops kind of wide receiver that can create separation and get open, but bring a little bit more explosiveness to his game. What does that combination between Jackson Arnold and Deion Burks look like? I want to see $150 from Deion Burks against Temple.
That'd be so fun if you really got to see some big-time plays from those two. And I think you know that. I think the guy I'm going to have my eyes on is Bauer Sharp. I think that tight end is the one area where you really left a lot to be desired. I mean, Austin Stogner is just what he is. There's a reason he's really not probably going to find his way through the pro ranks. I think you want to get back to having that Braden Willis type guy, that guy who is really dynamic. And especially with all the talent they have on the edge and in the way they like to space their offense out, following that kind of Jeff Levy sort of system that they're still going to be running with, I think you want to have a tight end who can really work the middle of the field and be dynamic, and they just didn't have it.
Especially after the catch. And that's what Bauer Sharp brings to the table, Dill. He caught for, 279 yards at the FCS level last year. 209 of those yards came after the catch. What did Braden Willis do so well a couple of years ago? Operate after the catch. Bauer Sharp is, again, he's a former quarterback that is a superior athlete that is still learning the tight end position, and there might be some growing pains there too, but he does bring you way more juice than what you had with Austin Stogner. I think the last guy I want to shout out, again, we're not giving nearly enough love to Nick Anderson. Shout out the guy on the boundary. I think Nick Anderson has a massive year because, again, Jackson Arnold's better suited for a wide receiver like Nick Anderson, who I'm looking at is Andrew Anthony, who sounds, I don't know how much Andrew Anthony's going to play because I think they're going to, and I think that's the right move, ease him back into it. Dill, we go back to Andrew Anthony when he transferred from our Michigan Wolverines, and that one stunt when he left for Oklahoma. Obviously looked awesome before the injury last year. What does he look like? Because, again, you talk about a quarterback-friendly wide receiver. Andrew Anthony is at the top of the list there.
And that's, I think, a really good point to make because you obviously have your guys who can get down the field and do some exciting things, but just the way Andrew Anthony's so smooth in and out of his breaks, runs really clean routes, again, gets separation in that short to intermediate range and gives your quarterback some easier throws. He's going to be a big part of this offense. And again, will it be this week against Temple? I kind of doubt it because you're probably going to try to work him in a little more slowly, especially because you don't really have a particularly tough week one game. But he is going to be a guy I think you're looking for to kind of make Jackson Arnold's life a little bit easier.
Talk about that wide receiver trio. And there's some guys off the bench that we're excited about, right? J.J. Hester creating a ton of buzz, Brennan Thompson, Jaquez Petaway, but Deion Burks, Nick Anderson, and a healthy Andrew Anthony with Bauer Sharp at tight end. That's a really fun offense.
I want to see Jaleel Fruit get back involved. I still think he's such a good player. There were just some mistakes last year, some things you just can't have happen. But, man, that year before in 2022, I was so excited for what he can be. And, again, probably not the premier wide receiver necessarily, but a really good weapon, I think, in an offense that has some guys who can create a lot of space for him.
Looking at the defense, I think I know what you want to start with, and that is the safety rotation. This is something we've been talking about since Zach Alley took the job. Zach Alley gets so creative in terms of how he uses safeties. He's coming into an Oklahoma defense, an Oklahoma safety room that might be the best safety room in the country. I think the question is, and it's a good problem to have, you got so many good ones. How are you going to get them all on the field, and how are you going to deploy them is probably the biggest question mark we have for this Oklahoma defense.
And that, to me, it's going to be what do they do with that cheetah role? Because it felt like last year a lot of times with Harrington or obviously with
Son McCullough.
Sorry, I was blanking on his name for a second. But they used that more as a linebacking, pass rushing sort of hybrid role. I really want to see that nickelback or that cheetah kind of go more towards a nickelback position where, again, it's a Dolby, it's a Spears Jennings, one of those guys who, again, I think can maybe provide some assistance for the middle, because I think they put way too much on Danny Stutzman and whoever was running with him as the second linebacker to patrol that middle, and it was a problem. It was a huge problem in that Arizona game. I really want to see what they do with that cheetah role.
Zach Alley, going back to Jacksonville State, I remember we broke down the film way back in maybe March or April. Like, he uses those safeties as robbers in the middle of the field, and you got some great safeties to do. You talk about a guy like Billy Bowman who just knows how to find the football, perfectly suited. I think that's how they're going to do it. And again, I think the question is, you got like 4 or 5 guys that you really want to get on the football field. Who are you going to get on the football field? How are you going to do it? Probably the biggest question mark we're looking at. Second, Dill, and I think probably a close second to the safety conversation. Who's the second linebacker? We know we got a dude in Danny Stutzman. We always felt like there just could have been more from the linebacker too last year, right? Whether it was Jaren Kanak, whether it was Kip Lewis. It sounds like Kip Lewis is going to be the guy. And you look at Kip Lewis, there's so much juice to this kid. He was an undersized linebacker last year as a redshirt freshman. He's going into year 3. He's put on some good weight. Man, if you get the Kip Lewis that I think we all envision, this is going to be a really fun linebacker room, because they're playing behind a defensive line that is going to win at the point of attack. What's the best thing to do with a good defensive line? Pair them up with some fast, rangy linebackers. It's exactly what Oklahoma might have here.
The reason I think you're looking at Kip Lewis is you just want a little more athleticism on the field, especially because Danny Stutzman does like to play that downhill kind of style, and they like to blitz him and do some other things with Danny Stutzman. I think Kip Lewis, again, just gives you a little more ability to cover more ground, go sideline to sideline. So that's kind of why I don't think you need another thumper, because Danny Stutzman's a very good run-stopping, downhill thumping linebacker. I think you want to pair him up with a guy who adds a little bit more athleticism into the room. And Kip Lewis at times did play some really good.
Kip Lewis is phenomenal athlete. And I think we just saw, for the Oklahoma fans that watched that Florida State game yesterday, like, if you don't have athletic linebackers like Florida State kind of struggled with, you're going to get exposed. And a guy like Jaren Kanak at times, whether it was running backs in the flat or carrying tight ends or just making plays in space, that's where he struggled.
That was the big thing with me, was tackling in space. I feel like there were way too many missed ones.
And Kip Lewis is a much better suited linebacker to operate in space. I would even throw in a guy like Lewis Carter too, who's been generating some buzz. We kind of just inherently feel good about the linebacker too. One, because you're playing next to Danny Stutzman, but I think more importantly, there's a ton of talent, and somebody's going to command that linebacker too.
Venables does do a really good job developing linebackers. Right. You go back to his time at Clemson, they really were effective.
Babies. That the linebacker position is Brent Venables' babies. Going to, I think the last storyline that I'm looking for is the edge rotation. I talked about this the other week. I think this is what you're going to see. And I'm just kind of projecting based on what I think these kids can do. Ethan Downs and Caden Woolard are your 2 heavy-handed edge rushers who can get after the passer, but are very good against the run. I think that's who you see on first and second down to stop the run. And then, all right, when we do inevitably stop the run against Temple, and there's going to be a lot of third and longs in this football game, who are going to be your pass rushing edge rushers? And I think it's going to be R. Mason Thomas and PJ. I think what's so fascinating is, all right, it's first and second down. You have Ethan Downs and Caden Woolard, and then you trot them off the field on third down, and you get a fresh R. Mason Thomas and PJ that are pinning their ears back and getting after the quarterback, 2 guys that really can attack that outside shoulder. I think that's a phenomenal combination for this Oklahoma defensive lines, particularly in that edge rusher room. Do they do that on Saturday against Temple? Or Friday night against Temple, excuse me. That's what I'm looking for here.
I'm so excited to see essentially what they think about what they have with our Mason Thomas and PJ Adebawore, because those are 2 guys who, I mean, they really do present something different than what Oklahoma's had. You've seen a lot of big physical defensive ends come through this program, whether it's your either Bothroyd or Ethan Downs, obviously. I really want to see them have a guy who can go get 10 sacks or something. I just don't think that number's been high enough for what I would expect out of Oklahoma. I think, again, you look at those 2 guys, our Mason Thomas and PJ, they really do have a little bit more juice and should be able to be more productive. Again, you've seen good disruptive units from the Oklahoma defensive line, but you haven't seen those sack numbers way up there. I think they got defensive ends who can do that.
And we knew, especially for a guy like PJ, but I think also for our Mason Thomas, it wasn't going to be year 1 or maybe even year 2 for our Mason Thomas. And our Mason Thomas, I think it could have been year 2, but obviously with some injuries and just not being on the football field as much as you would like. I look at PJ, he's up to 265 pounds. The dude looks like an absolute freak. If he's maintained even 80% of his athleticism from what we saw coming out of high school, he's going to be a problem. And I think PJ was more impressive than I would have even thought as a true freshman. I mean, he came into the Big 12 last year and showed impressive physicality for a guy that we thought might kind of lack it coming out of high school. And I think the last thing is, all right, what did Jade Jackson and David Stone look like? Hey, like, we know they're going to get some burn. A guy like Danny Okoye as well, throw that guy in the mix. There are some young, talented defensive linemen as well that are probably going to get some burn in Temple. How do those cats look? That's what I'm looking for. Dill, we'll close it out there. We're probably breaking this one down Friday night, right? Again, it's
you got to break down the new quarterback. There's nothing more exciting than getting your new 5-star quarterback on the field, hopefully as a big day. That would get me amped if I'm an Oklahoma fan.
The boys are fired up. I don't know if I've been fired up for a 40-point spread game.
Remember the day JJ came in and just lit Wyatt up. Like, there's nothing more exciting for Michigan.
We're very excited for a 40-point spread, and I think we're just excited for college football in general. We'll close it out there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, again, consider subscribing to the channel. To the Sooner fans, appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.